Welcome to 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. My name is Matt.
And I'm Dan the Movie Man.
Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm a little freaked out by what we have coming up here next, Matt.
It's our first horror movie, isn't it?
It sure is. I don't know. It might not be the first movie that we've been scared of, but it is our first horror genre movie.
Yeah. Blue Velvet.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So we, of course, are here today to talk about The Evil Dead from 1981, directed by Sam Raimi. If you're joining us on this venture, this is the 7th episode, 6th movie we're discussing. We're going through the 1001 movies you must see before you die, the 2021 edition. It is, of course, written by Stephen J. Schneider and updated by Ian Hayden Smith, available on Amazon.com or wherever you get your books. We are not affiliated with them at all. I'm just letting you know where you can find it.
You can hop in.
Yes, you feel free to sponsor, but I'm just letting you know where you can get your book if you like to follow with us. Last week we talked about Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which was on page 671. If you have the book or if you've been following along with us, you know that page had 2 movies on it, Fast Times at Ridgemont High and The Evil Dead. So we are here to discuss The Evil Dead this week. I'm going to read a description, and Dan's going to provide us the stats. So The Evil Dead, if you aren't familiar, directed by Sam Raimi, 1981, is the ultimate experience in grueling terror. When a group of college students find a mysterious book and recording in the old wilderness cabin they've rented for the weekend, they unwittingly unleash a demonic force from the surrounding forest. Ooh. The film stars Bruce Campbell, Ellen, I'm going to probably say this wrong, Sandweiss, Ellen Sandweiss, Richard DeManincor, and Betsy Baker, along with a few others. Dan, what do we know about The Evil Dead that you could share with us?
Alrighty. Let me get a picture of you back so I can see your face. Okay, so this was the very first or the directorial debut of Mr. Sam Raimi, who I believe you might have already said. When he ended up writing this movie, it's an independent film. So, as most independent films go, he had to source the money in order to produce it. So, one enters Mr. Campbell. So he comes in, he's one of the producers on this. He put some of his money into it. A lot of friends, family invested in this, and altogether they ended up bringing in about $90,000 to make this happen. So originally they were going to do this in Mr. Raimi's hometown, and ultimately that didn't work out. But they were invited to Morristown, where this was filmed, and they found this cabin. So what's interesting is I believe there were 13 cast and crew members that were in this. This cabin, in reality, had no plumbing. It did have a telephone line. It was very cold when they were filming this. And the 13 cast and crew members, when they were on location doing these, they slept all together in one room. So it was very uncomfortable. It led to a lot of arguments while on the set. One of the things that played into some of the horror in the film, Sam's approach at this almost James Cameron-esque in some senses, where he felt that real life pain played into a portrayal of horror in the movie. So, just as an example, Mr. Campbell was going through, he ended up hurting his leg. And one of the ways that you get some of the reaction that he had from the horror and everything else he had going on there, Sam would poke his injury with a stick, apparently, to get some of his reaction. And apparently, yeah.
That's brutal.
It is brutal. And yeah, I think he was in his 20s at the time, very young. So not sure if that played into that at all, but it definitely carries over on film. And one of the things this movie is known for is its camera angles. And because it had such a low budget, there are it's amazing, and I don't want to get too much into it before we get into the review, but just how you get the sense of something malevolent lurking without actually seeing it. And I think that that
Hmm.
carries really over well in the film. And when this movie was released, it made 2.7 to 2.9 million dollars in the US, and then also ended up making between 2.9 million and 27 million worldwide. I don't know why that figure varies so much or where the accounting for is it, but ultimately this was a success, and it opened up for the director's second film, which was Crime Wave, which was not good at all. Apparently, very low ratings. I've never seen the movie myself, so I can't speak to it. So he had not gained critical acclaim at that point, even after the release of his first successful film venture here, the Evil Dead. And the studio never lost faith in him and brought him back for The Evil Dead 2, which is held in higher regard, actually, than what we'll be talking about today. And I know you had some notes that you wanted to get into on that. So, Matt, turn it back over to you.
Sure. I'll just go ahead and with my initial thoughts if you don't mind. Um, yeah, I was telling you before we hit record, a lot of people do prefer Evil Dead 2 over this. I know a lot of people love this whole franchise. I too am a semi fan. I wouldn't say that I'm a hardcore Evil Dead fan, but I enjoy the series. I know, Dan, you and I went to the 2013 reboot. I'm not going to call it a remake because it may not be. It's a reboot of this Evil Dead series. And I remember at that time, I had not seen any Evil Dead. And that was my first experience. I was like, oh my God, what am I watching? And then that made me go back and watch this. And I was like, oh my God, what am I watching? Right. So it was one of those things that it jolts you if you don't know anything about it or if you're not prepared for it. It kind of makes you go, "What am I watching?" It's a zombie movie essentially is what it is, but you don't know that. It's basically a zombie monster movie, and you have these people, these teenagers or young adults who uh, are your core characters that this stuff is happening to in the cabin. And Ash, and I think one of the characters is supposed to be his sister and a girlfriend, and then another guy who's not pictured there, but and then one of them is his girlfriend. So it's telling you this story of these characters. And when I went back to it, not counting the time that I watched it right after 2013, but when I went back to it with a different set of eyes, a more mature film. I don't want to call myself anything that I'm not, but like a more lover of film than I am now. Uh, I went back to it, and I gotta say, this is a phenomenal movie, and that's why I like this one better. So I definitely this is definitely my favorite film of the definitely the original trilogy, and I venture to say probably, if I'm being honest with myself, in my opinion, the best film of the Evil Dead franchise. Um, I don't because you could make an argument for Evil Dead 2. You could make an argument even for Evil Dead 2013. Um, and I would listen to both of those arguments. But for me, this original does it. Dan, you hinted at the camera work, and I'm going to go into it in my notes here in a minute. But the camera work is beautiful. It is everything you didn't know you wanted it to be. It is creepy. It is terrifying. It is haunting. I was watching it last night before we recorded this, and it gave me the shivers. Like I was like, oh, like this is. I forgot how creepy this is. Like it makes you feel like you're watching something. You know something's out there. You're watching these people interact as this that from the POV of this thing, and it makes you fear for them and it makes you fear for what's to come. Um, I really enjoy this movie. That's my initial thoughts. Dan, how about you, sir?
Just to comment on one thing before I go into my thoughts. So you're talking about again the camera work, which I think is one of the things that when people talk about this movie, that's going to be one of the primary points, no matter how you cut it. But with the $90,000 that they had, they didn't have a lot of money to invest in like camera dollies. So they ended up doing a lot of crazy things to get the effects that you would with, more advanced equipment. So one of the pieces where they apparently lubricated up some, pieces of lumber, slid cameras forward, down to get like shots moving in like super quick. They ended up having, the camera suspended between two guys running around to give it like the shake cam view. And there's a lot of things in this that I think have carried over to horror films. And some of the reviews, because I also look at other folks' reviews at films, talk about um, in particular. Where do I want to go with this? We'll come back to that. But ultimately, when you have a movie like this, it influences a lot of the culture that comes from it. Oh, that was it. So they talk about the dark humor in this, and maybe there were parts, but to me, there wasn't a lot of dark humor. I felt this was more
No,
serious.
it was kind of cheesy at times, but it was meant to be. It was never a moment where I felt they went too cheesy that they weren't trying to be cheesy. They knew what they were. They knew Sam Raimi and the team knew what this was going to be. They weren't trying to make it anything more than that. And I think that's what makes it work. They embrace the cheese, so to speak.
Yeah, and they go like all in with the practical effects that they had. Apparently, to get the eye effects, I know I'm just going into interesting things here, but these were actually contacts that they put into their eyes to give themselves like the evil eyes. So supposedly, these contacts were so thick that their eyes couldn't, from what I had read or understood, like breathe. So they could only wear them for a certain amount of time unless it would really mess their eyes up. And then we have practical effects on this. I believe there's one carpenter on set that worked on the outside of the where they were. So he cut out a whole bunch of things, put it outside to kind of spruce up the cabin, make it look spookier than what it was. But just how certain directors and certain production teams can stretch that dollar and make something different, really different than what you've seen before. And I think that again, the sense of dread that you have from something you can't even see, just the evil itself, even up to the end of the movie where Bruce Campbell turns around or his character Ash turns around and he sees, he just screams, ah, like it's cheesy at the end, but at the same point, it gets its point across. There were times like I was skeeved out or scared um, for the characters because something's about to get them, something's about to tear through, something's about to hurt them. And poor Ash, man, how many times did he get thrown into a bookcase and get caught under a bookcase? The only thing, I guess, when we're talking about cheesiness, one thing that did stand out to me, it was kind of funny, is he's there. There was a scene that he has a chance to take a swing at one of the characters with an axe. He just kind of stands there. There's another scene where he's got a gun. He just kind of stands there and he doesn't really act. And then towards the end, you have this gradual buildup where he just becomes frustrated. He's had enough. He ends up having to cut his own girlfriend's head off. I know that had to be a traumatic moment for him. And yeah, he starts to become unhinged, which I feel like is part of what these folks really wanted to do because they possessed everybody else at this point. He's the only one that they haven't got to, but they're toying with him the whole time. They're playing with him. They're making him, feel nuts. And honestly, you start to feel nuts because you have these characters sitting around, they're singing like little lullabies, and we're gonna get you, we're gonna find you. And yeah, it's something else. Just something that stands out and really sets the way for films, even like Scream, which became popular, and you have comedy involved with horror. And I think that's part of what this is known for too. There were other films way before this that did the same thing, had comedy and horror, but this really started putting it, I think, more so on the map and the centerfold. And as far as creating that sense of dread without having to do extensive makeups, even though they did do extensive makeups here, but as much money into the productions that they would have.
Yeah. So I agree. I agree. That's my review. I agree. I agree with everything you say and said. The unique from the very beginning, the unique opening shot through the water and the woods. It's you just know you feel this anxiousness come across you, this dread, which doesn't happen a lot in movies these days. And even though something that I've seen a bunch of times before, even though this is something that was it's old and it's doesn't necessarily you wouldn't think that it would still be scary by today's standards, but it is. It absolutely is. It has a creepy atmosphere throughout the whole movie. And it doesn't take long to get going. That's something I noted. The movie wastes no time getting started. Um, uh, I think Sam Raimi in this proved to the world that he could make a product that was both original and terrifying. Um, and you like you said I didn't remember if you said it before we recorded or after we hit record, but this didn't necessarily make Sam Raimi, didn't put him on the map. That wouldn't happen until a little later. But now people look back at Bruce Campbell and Raimi, and they think of this film, and this is a very beloved film. Again, maybe the sequel, Evil Dead 2, is more beloved. But it's got a low budget feel because it is, but I think that works to its advantage. It makes it feel more creepy. It makes it feel more scary. I think because if it did have a bigger budget, it might not have felt, I don't know about you, but like when I watch something that's like independent, low budget, if I've never seen it before, I'm like super terrified because like it just has that I don't even know what it is. It just has that feeling that like, oh, anything can happen at any given moment because I've not seen this before, and it's not some big Hollywood production. It's a you know Joe Blow with a camera and his friends making a movie, and that's essentially what this is. So, um, it proves that you don't need a big budget to make an accomplished film. Um, I'll get to that in a minute. I was going to start talking about is this a movie you should see before you die? But I think this movie could be considered. The makeup effects I wanted to touch on, like you discussed with the contacts, the makeup. At first glance, you're like, that's it. That's the and I can't think of the name that they're actually called in the Evil Dead franchise. They're not zombies, but they're
Deadites.
deadites. Yes, thank you. Like that's the Deadite, especially when you look at like the newer movies. But I think I don't know. Maybe it just goes back to being older, wiser, more appreciative of film. I think this is almost more effective than the newer movies. That lady there and that screen grab just a minute ago, that is creepy. I don't want her peeking at me in my bedroom, you know. And let's talk about the cabin. Why would you go into this? There is no part of me that if my friends were like, hey, let's go rent a cabin for a week, and I got there and that's what I had to walk into and stay in.
Well, the
Nah.
fun part about this too is that cabin in particular, it got so cold when they were staying in there. Supposedly they burned some of the furniture just to stay warm. So it was just not the ideal vacation spot in real life or apparently for a horror movie. So that's kind of funny as well.
Yeah, I just why would you I mean, it's meant to be. I'm not knocking the movie, but as a person in life, I would see that and be like, okay, well you guys have fun. I'm gonna go now. um I think this movie, wow. I keep wanting to get to the end, but I'm not there yet. So I'm gonna hold off until we're at the end. So I'm gonna turn it back over to you, Dan.
So I guess just closing notes then. Um, this movie had a lot of gore for a horror film, and again, You had blood that was mixed with coffee grounds to make it seem more realistic, something that I think carried over into a lot of franchises after this as well, made it darker. I think it stained a little different. The one scene that stands out as being probably the most violent or grotesque in this entire thing is the wood scene where Ash's sister is basically raped by the evil spirit in the middle of the woods. Um, it was rough to watch that, and I'm sure for audiences at the time it was something that they weren't necessarily expecting. I think that comes back to not being part of a studio where they test the limit a little more than, someone who would answer to someone in the corporate office saying, okay, we're definitely going to cut this. Sam Raimi himself mentioned that looking back on that, it's his most or one of his most regretted scenes that he's ever put into a film, and so much so that he took it out of the Evil Dead 2, which, from my understanding, Matt, is basically a remake of the original in some respects.
Right.
But
It's not shot for shot, but it's essentially the same story, same idea. It completely ignores the events of this movie. So it's like Ash is going to this cabin for the first time with a sister and his girlfriend, and it's like, oh, okay. We're just pretending that all that other stuff didn't happen. But I have to question, and you may not know the answer, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but Raimi was involved in the 2013 version too, right?
he, from what I was reading or understood, I think he was consulted on it, but I'm not sure if he necessarily had the final calls. But I do know, from what I'd seen, it was more like regrettably it was added into the
Right, because
2013.
I was just gonna say, because it's a lot more as graphic as it was in this movie. It's a lot more graphic in the 2013 version,
Correct.
like as far as that particular scene that you're referring to.
Yeah, and I could look more into that. And again, um, it's just something that you probably wouldn't have seen prior to that, and even today's standards, I don't know necessarily. And it's a hard watch, and when you have a scene like that, usually it serves a purpose. And I think critics of the time really asked, did this serve a purpose in this movie? Did it take away from the overall film? I think you get the sense definitely there's an evil spirit, and this just takes you like how far it was willing to go, in order to move. But on a lighter note, one other thing to talk about Sam Raimi, carrying over to today's times, because this movie again had tons of sequels. It's considered a cult classic. It got more popular over time than it did at its initial release. It's blown up since, right? Um, Spawned comic books like Ash versus Jason versus Freddy, like all this other kind of stuff. We had the Army of Darkness, which is in, I think, some Marvel comics. We had all kinds of things that were coming from this. So it's definitely become a cultural icon. And to put Bruce Campbell up there, he's known now as like the king of B horror comedy. This is him, guys. And if you see his face, instantly recognizable. Sets the way for a lot of my favorite film franchises, including, um, let's say Scream. Like Scream franchise, I think takes a lot like the comedy horror aspect and puts that together and blends the two. But the last interesting thing, Sam Raimi, his car is in this movie and is in pretty much almost every single movie that he's ever made, up to and including.
Is that the
uh,
car?
that's the car. That's Sam Raimi's car. It was in the 2013 remake as well. It was in the Doctor Strange. It gets thrown up into the air in one of the scenes. Like he puts his car in pretty much everything. That's like his signature on his films, and I think that's interesting. And um, hopefully, in movies in the future, that's still part of that. But Matt, I'm going to kick it back to you for your closing argument, and I guess we'll finally get to the end, and you get to tell us: is this a movie you should see before you die?
So I struggled, and this is what I started to say a couple times. Believe it or not, I struggled with the question. Do I think this is a great movie? Yes, I do. Do I think that this is a great horror movie? Yes, I do. Do I think that this is a movie you must see before you die? I struggled a little bit because I had to really think about what that meant. Does this movie do something that maybe other movies before it didn't do? Um, is there something in this that makes it stand out? And yes, I'm stalling just to have everyone on the edge of their seat, but I had to I went back and forth. I'm not exaggerating. I really did struggle with that, whether I was going to say yes or no. I was like, this could be the second no from me on this show. But ultimately, I went with yes. It is a movie you must see before you die, if nothing else, for the camera work. And this movie is, I consider it to be a masterclass of filmmaking and how you could, work a camera and use, a low budget to make something beautiful like this. Yes, I just called The Evil Dead beautiful. um, I think this movie should be shown to college students for to film students for those reasons. So for that aspect, not necessarily for the story or for anything specific that happens in the movie, but for the filmmaking of it, of making of the film itself, the camera work, the budget, the you know everything that went into making it. Yes, I think is a film that you must see before you die.
Well, got a little people running around. As far as the film goes, I'm on a similar flight path. I think that it did, you know, mark an important point in film for horror, especially as a lot of folks springboarded off this. We're getting away from just slashers and more into an element paranormal, and we can experiment around with that and do more than just The Exorcist and Poltergeist. I mean, we're going for like full bad stuff, and we're putting an '80s tinge to it, and it really finds its voice here. And for independent filmmakers, I think it's a statement that, yeah, you don't have to have the biggest studio budget in order to make something happen. Like, you just have to have a camera, some friends, and an idea, and you can put some things together, and you can put out a movie that, even if it's a B movie horror film, it can turn a huge profit and ultimately springboard into something bigger. And Sam Raimi back then, who's that kid? You know, cool. We put this movie out. Awesome. Sam Raimi today,
He was like 21 or something when he made this. Like he
very
was
young, 22.
very early 20s.
Yep, 22
Like
years old.
that's nuts. At 21, I was working at Lowe's. And he's
Every
making
one of
the
us,
Evil Dead. Yes, and he's making the Evil Dead. Sorry. Go ahead.
and just have the impact that he did, and even like Bruce Campbell, like, again, where would he be without the Evil Dead franchise? I mean, he went on into different television series. He did different movies. He's done all kinds of different things since then, kind of in the similar realm. But again, he's an icon. Um, and what they had and what they did with what they had, I think this movie definitely deserves. Yes, this is a movie you should see before you die. And I'm more excited now, I think, more about the independent stuff, just because the reins, I think, are looser. I mean, we just talked about Fast Times at Ridgemont High. There's a decision to cut a certain scene. If you want to watch that episode, go ahead. But the reason being, studio execs come look at it. This is what your rating is going to be with us in it. Not sure it's going to get as much money, and maybe they're right, making the right call for the financial aspect of it. But films, I feel, should, in some degree, push the boundary. And independent filmmakers have more of that autonomy to do that. And it could pay off. It might not. You might flop. or you might be one of the next biggest directors in horror, really, of all time. So, and not only horror. I mean, look at what else he's freaking directed, like Spider-Man. He's in all,
Spider-Man, yeah.
like, oh, holy crap! Like, what a career! What a career!
Yeah. I love that they all seem to embrace it too. Like it's not a thing where they're like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that because that was horror." That's like the early part of my career. Like Jamie Lee Curtis went through a phase like that. Like she's not like that anymore. She embraces Halloween, but like a lot of people that were in those early horror movies kind of went through a phase where like, "Oh no, I don't want to be associated with that because I'm an actor. I don't do horror anymore." Almost like they're better than that. And Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, to my knowledge anyway, have never done that. They've always embraced these movies. Every time there's a new one, they're somehow involved, either producer, executive producer, cameo, something.
And together, like
yes,
pretty much on everything.
Yes. So I appreciate that as well, because you know it kind of sucks is when you're a fan of something and the actor in that thing or the director of that thing kind of just doesn't care about that thing anymore. It's kind of like a shot to the heart. It's kind of like, oh, really? Like, I love this. I'm gonna just as another example. I met Alec Baldwin a couple months ago now, and it was his first convention that he'd ever done. He had no idea how many people loved The Shadow. And this isn't a thing where he was like, "Oh, I'm better than superhero movies," like I was just talking about with Jamie Lee Curtis. But that was a movie that he did and moved on with his life. It kind of bombed at the box office. It wasn't a big hit. He never thought anything more of it. Honest to God, and he even talked about it there. He had zero idea until people were bringing him Shadow action figures, Shadow posters, Shadow this, Shadow that, and how beloved that movie was. And he said he has a new appreciation for that film now because of the amount of love that it has that he didn't know. So like I think that's really cool that you know, when actors can embrace their work or directors even can embrace their work that they have made that maybe wasn't the best, but it has a following. People like it, people love it, people, you know, it made an impact to people. So with that said, we have got to figure out what we're going to talk about next. Dan, we've done this a couple different ways. We've been doing a randomizer generator, which is what we're still doing. But rather than doing it off screen, we're going to try something. We're going to try it in real time. So if it doesn't work, our bad. We're going to figure it out on the fly, I guess. But I have a spinner wheel that I'm going to share the screen. And hopefully the goal is all of us, including Dan, myself, and the viewers, are going to be able to see the spinner. All 995 movies left remaining in the book are in this wheel, on this wheel. And it is going to give us the movie name. So it's going to tell us exactly which movie.
Just out of curiosity, what happens if we land on a movie we've already done?
I've removed those, so we're not going to do that.
Including
so it's going
from Picture
including
okay.
Oh no, not from Picture This. So only things that have been removed are the ones that we've discussed since doing the 1001 challenge. So with that said, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to do this. I'm going to present. I'm going to share screen. I'm going to go to wheel. Are you able to see my wheel?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we're doing good so far. So we've got 995 movies remaining on the list, and we're going to spin the wheel. And
did you type all these?
I don't want to talk about it.
Oh my God.
We're not going to talk about it. So we're going to spin the wheel. Whatever comes up, that's it. We're doing it live, real time. We can't pick and choose. We're not going to be like, that's it. So here we go. Ready? And boom. My Man Godfrey from 1936.
36. I'm going to find the
My
page
Man
number.
Godfrey from 1936. And that is on page 128. One step ahead of you, Dan.
Page number
128. I had the index open so that way I could be prepared.
Yeah.
So it's from 1936. It's
directed by Gregory LaCava.
Starring William Powell, Carol Lombard, Alice Brady, Gail Patrick.
But several Oscar nominations.
Got nominated for some Oscars.
Woo!
Yeah. This could be interesting. We haven't been in the 30s yet.
Yeah, this is going to be new and exciting for us, and we're probably due for one a little further back in time, to be honest. So, yeah, looking forward.
Right. I mean, yeah, we've done Blue Velvet. We've been in the 80s for a while. Like,
so it's an hour and 34 minutes. It looks like.
Oh, well, that's an easy watch, right? Even if it's terrible, but I can't imagine it's that terrible, right? It's in the book.
Doubt it.
And it looks like it's streaming on Prime Video.
Woo!
It is streaming on Prime. So if you have Prime, you can follow along with us. We will be watching this and talking about it next week. Make sure you subscribe, ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Like we talked about last episode, once we get far enough ahead, Dan and I are recording these in advance. So once we get far enough ahead, we're going to start releasing these 2 times a week rather than just one. Otherwise, we're all going to be here forever doing this. So make sure you ring the notification bell, subscribe, like, comment. I'm still up for if you comment and let us know a movie that's that's in the book. It has to be in the book. But if you let us know something, hey, let's watch The Fly. Then don't know why I picked that one, but that's where my brain went. If let's watch The Fly, then we will jump to that one, and we'll go out of order and do that as our next pick. So let's hear from you, and let us know how you feel about what we're doing, if you have any suggestions, and so on and so forth. Dan, what do you got?
Ultimately, guys, I'm just thankful that you're tuning in with us. I know Matt's going to play the outro here for us in a moment. But ultimately, we're not professionals. We're learning more about film. If you, again, like Matt said, see something that we missed and you want to make a point, or you just want to tell us you disagree wholeheartedly with our reviews and this isn't a movie that you should see before you die, let us know. Because ultimately, we want to talk about the banner. Maybe we can do an interactive episode. But, yeah, give us those comments, suggestions. We want this to be kind of like a movie club, like what we originally intended, I think. But for more folks to come in on it and just let us know your thoughts. So,
yeah, and like you said, interactive, like that's a good idea. Like we're using a new program, another peek behind the curtain. We're using new software to record these episodes. So this program is going to allow us to feature to go live on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook. So, that is something that we could definitely explore also, as far as just, having that conversation, going live, so we'll be sure, if we do that, we'll be sure to let everyone know well in advance what, when and where that's going to be. So you can join us and be interactive with us, and we can have a conversation. Maybe we'll do that on like a recap episode. Like Dan, I know we had discussed possibly doing like a review, like the road so far, or something like that. maybe that's when we can do the live interactive and see, if anyone wants to talk to us about this. That would be a cool idea.
Absolutely. And yeah, if you guys want to, I don't know if we can figure out how to get the chat going or a chat going or some way you guys could interact with us.
Yeah, no, and that will happen. Yes. So that's what this program will allow us to do. So we'll be able to, if they type in and comment, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, it's going to go live on all 3 platforms, and whoever comments in, if they will pop up and we can select the comments. So they'll show up on the screen. Even they will, we can read them. We can conversate with the fans.
We are getting advanced here, guys. We are becoming one.
Yeah, we're not professionals, but we're trying.
Learning more along
that's
the way.
all for now. Yeah, no, for sure. That's all for now. We're going to wrap things up. I know Dan's got little ones he needs to be putting to bed, and it is getting late here in old Maryland as we record. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for subscribing. We love you all. Love one another. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Catch you with my man Godfrey, guys.